Hello, everybody. How was the good time at the keynote? Yes, excellent. Well, thank you all for coming to this session and to the conference this week. Hope you have a great time. It means a great deal to Tableau and to the community here that you all came this week. So thank you very much. We're going to be talking about eye tracking and how that can teach us and you to build better dashboards. So I hope you enjoyed the session. My name is Andy Cockgreave. I'm technical evangelist at Tableau and author of the Big Book of Dashboards. I've been with Tableau for 6 years, and I downloaded Tableau 10 years ago in November. So it's been a long, incredible journey. And I show the book here just because most of what you're going to see, the dashboards we've used for this research came out of the book. So that's, if you're wondering where they came from, that's where they're from. So that's me, and then I'll quickly hand you over to my colleague, Amy, who will introduce herself.
Hi, my name is Amy Alberts. I manage the user research team in Tableau Dev, and I'm a cognitive psychologist by training, and I have an expertise in human memory, human-computer interaction, eye tracking, and specifically psychophysics. Now, psychophysics isn't something that most people know what it is, and it's kind of easier to illustrate than it is to explain. And so if you look at this visual, all of you are seeing very slowly the color changing, going from orange to yellow to green. So all of you are seeing those hues change at the exact same time. Our brains are governed by laws that are referred to as the Weber and Fechner laws of psychophysics, okay? And these laws are really cool. They explain a lot about how we interact with the world, but they actually can also explain, to some degree, how we interact with dashboards, which is why I'm here today to talk about stuff.
All right. Thank you, Amy. Psychophysics, does anybody wish they'd studied that at college? Sounds awesome. I think I did in some way, but that was mostly illegal substances. But anyway, allegedly. I don't know. What happens in Vegas stays here, all right? Okay, a little bit of housekeeping before we start. Q&A, we're going to just go with the time and see whether we do Q&A as a group or not at the end. We have nothing else to do today, or at least not for 4 hours, so please come and ask us questions if we don't do live Q&A. Secondly, please put your hand up if you have downloaded the app. Everybody, right, that means everybody can fill out the session survey. Amy and I do this session a lot, and it means a great deal to us to know which bits are good and which bits are bad. So please just help us improve this presentation by telling us the bad bits in the session survey and the good bits on Twitter. Thank you very much. We're going to share some of the history and some links and resources, particularly in the start of the session. Everything you're going to see, there's a list of this on my blog. It's at tabsoft.co/eyes. And I've got this URL on the bottom of most of the screens as well. So just relax, enjoy the show. You can go and check out the resources later. Final housekeeping is we are repeating this session. If you love it so much, tell all your friends to come back at 9 o'clock on Thursday. On Wednesday at 1:30, I'm doing a session based on tips and tricks we learned in the book. So come check that out. And you, too, can take part in real, proper research, real time at this conference, by going and checking out finding Amy in the labs, and to help us get more and more solid answers to the questions that eye tracking is arising. So please go check out the labs all week. All right, what are we going to talk about? We are going to talk about how and why we started eye tracking research at Tableau. We're going to talk about what it is, and a little bit of what it isn't. And then Amy's going to do the real work and tell you about our studies and the results of what we've done. Does that sound good? Excellent. All right. And at the end of this, we're going to give you 4 or 5 tips of how you can build better dashboards, which is kind of the whole point. So why do eye tracking studies on dashboards? Well, if you've seen any of my presentations over the last 4 or 5 years, I've been teaching people how to build dashboards since about 2012. And what I've mostly used is this as an example of how to lay out dashboards. This is classic eye tracking research from Jacob Nielsen and Don Norman, and it's research into how people look at search pages and news pages. Now that's text. That's not data visualization, that's text. But what you see here is what's called the F pattern, or sometimes the Z pattern. People look at the top left-hand side of a page, they scan across, then they go down the line, they scan across a little bit less, and then they get bored and they just go down the page. Right? That's why the #1 spot on Google is so vital. And me being, I kind of was having this conversation with Amy when I met her about 18 months ago for the first time and saying, well, this is how I've taught people to lay out dashboards because this is how people look at news pages and screens. And Amy's got a very good eyebrow raise. The eyebrow raise, the researcher in her went, well, do you have any evidence of that for data visualization? And I was like, oh. No, I don't. So here we are, a year later, as a result of that conversation. Because this has been my mantra. If you're going to build dashboards, copy the F pattern when making dashboards. Does it turn out I was wrong all these years? Well, we're going to reveal that in a moment. As we started, we had a look around. Is there any academic research in the field of eye tracking and data visualization? And there's really only this research by Michelle Borkins. She's done a bunch of research with eye tracking and data visualization, but it's largely been focused on single charts and looking at memory and recall for facts within charts. It's really cool research. Go check it out. Again, it's on the link. But it's not about dashboards, so we had to change that. So we started doing the research. Amy's in the research team. That's awesome. And one of the things we do when you start thinking about eye tracking is think about how powerful the cognitive system is. You know, this eye and this brain have evolved over millions of years, and it's awesome. But it's also fallible, right? So just to prove the fallibility of your eyes and my eyes and Amy's eyes, we're just going to show you a video to show why getting information across is really important. Let's see if we can get this to play.
Clearly, somebody in this room murdered Lord Smythe, who, at precisely 3:34 this afternoon, was brutally bludgeoned to death with a blunt instrument. I want each of you to tell me your whereabouts at precisely the time that this dastardly deed took place.
I was polishing the brass in the master bedroom.
I was buttering his lordship's scones below stairs, sir.
Why, I was planting my petunias in the potting shed.
Constable, arrest Lady Smythe.
But how did you know?
Madam, as any horticulturist will tell you, one does not plant petunias until May is out. Take her away. It's just a matter of observation. The real question is, how observant were you?
Action.
Clearly, somebody in this room murdered Lord Smythe, who, at precisely 3:34 this afternoon, was brutally bludgeoned to death with a blunt instrument. I want each of you to tell me your whereabouts at precisely the time that this dastardly deed took place.
I was polishing the brass in the master bedroom.
I was buttering his lordship's scones below stairs, sir.
Why, I was planting my petunias in the potting shed.
Constable, arrest Lady Smythe.
Whoa. How many saw, did anyone see like more than 5 of those? Exactly. Maybe you saw 1 or 2 and thought, hey, I saw the single change. Right, it turns out there were 21. So that video was done by Transport for London in London to raise awareness about cyclists and help people think about looking on the road. But the point there is that when we're building and communicating information, for all the power of our eyes, they're actually, they're fallible, right? So we've got to work out how to help our dashboard consumers see what you want them to see. And you can help this with eye tracking. Eye tracking technology has got a great history. First started about 100 years ago, and the first eye trackers required you to insert into your eye an opaque contact lens with a little hole in it with wires trailing out of them. We're recreating that system this week in the labs. No, we're not. No. So that was a pretty brutal way of doing it. And then what you've got on the screen here is seminal work from Albert, yeah. Right. From the 1960s, looking at the painting in the top right and seeing how people look at a painting with different guided tasks. It's really good stuff. You notice the eye tracker there. There they had, the infrared technology was improving, but the head had to be absolutely motionless. So you had to get a bite plate into which you would insert, or you'd put it into your mouth, and then screws would kind of lock onto your skull, so that you were totally fixed. And that's how we all look at dashboards, right? No. So things have evolved, but this is some seminal work. When Amy started off on this, the technology was getting smaller. And what's going on is your eyes are getting flooded with infrared. And we're looking for the little reflection of light in your eye from which we can infer a huge amount of information, which Amy will tell you about in a minute. But even then, the technology was kind of getting better. You were getting this massive spreadsheet of XY coordinates, but you then still had to manually link this to the images you'd shown your subject. So still a lot of work, right?
Yes.
Whereas the good news is that now eye trackers are almost commodities. We're using Tobii eye tracker, which is a bit more powerful than this one. But you can use this stuff to control games and do stuff with the user interface just by looking around. It's incredible technology. And this is what it looks like now. This is one of our subjects looking at one of the dashboards, and now you get all this incredible information. Tobii, the software knows where you're looking and for how long you're looking at that stuff. And with that, to tell you about the biology of the eye and the studies, it's over to Amy.
Thank you, Andy.
All right.
Okay, so we're going to talk about the eye for a little bit, and then we're going to talk about the studies that we did. So this is the human eye. It's an amazing piece of technology in and of itself. Its job is to perceive the world around us, and it does a lot of different work to try to do that. And so we're going to go through the parts of it that are actually important for doing eye tracking, so you guys have a better understanding of what's behind all of this. So the first part of the eye that's important is the cornea. It's the outside of the eye. Its job is to protect all that perception gooiness that's inside. And it's a reflective surface, so that's actually important because the reflection, the eye tracker actually relies on the one reflection off the cornea, and so its job basically for eye tracking is to produce that reflection as well as protect our eye. The next part is the pupil. So the pupil's job is to let light into the eye, to allow light to enter in and be perceived by the photoreceptors that are at the back of the eye. So the pupil opens and closes, usually based on the light around us. It also opens and closes based on arousal. So that's not the vaguest type of arousal, but more so emotional, physical stress arousal. Okay, our eyes open and close based on that as well. There's a lot of research about that. Eye trackers typically can perceive those changes, but that's just not a part of the research that we're doing if anyone was curious. The next part is the retina. So the retina is a sheet of photoreceptors that sit at the back of the eye. So it's also a reflective surface. So it's the retina that's responsible for red eye. If you ever take a picture and you see red eye, that's the retina reflecting back at you. And so the retina, it's responsible for everything from color perception to contour perception. It can perceive motion, etc. Okay, so it does a lot of work, and its job essentially is to push all of this data that it's getting from the environment around us into the brain. So the thing that a lot of us don't realize is that our brain is actually physically inside of our eye, and it's positioned inside the optic nerve. So the optic nerve is actually brain tissue that is physically inside the eye. It's pulling all that data in. It actually creates a blind spot. It's hard to do a blind spot test in a room like this, but I would ask all of you, if you're curious to see your blind spot, if you go outside on a dark night and you look up at the stars, look at a star that's pretty small, far away, and then look to the left or the right of it. When you do that, the star will disappear, and that's your blind spot. So there's actually a part of your eye that's totally blind. Our brain does a lot of work to actually compensate for that blind spot that we have, but sometimes it can't really do that, and so you can actually fake it out and make you be able to perceive that blind spot. But anyway, it's quite extraordinary that our brain is sitting in there, it's pulling all that information in so that we can perceive and interact with the world around us. So the next part of the eye, and the final part that's really important, is a part of the retina. It's called the fovea. Okay, so the fovea is the most cellular dense area of the retina. It has, I think, 1/10,000th of the visual field. Okay, so it's a very, very small part of our visual field, but it actually takes up 50% of all the cells that are in the retina. So it's a total resource hog, basically, right? And what it's doing is allowing us to perceive color and texture and all the beautiful detail that we see when we look directly at something. So the thing to remember is that is what an eye tracker is seeing. The eye tracker is detecting the foveal vision. okay? It's not detecting the peripheral vision. It's not detecting everything that we're perceiving all around. It's just detecting that 1/10,000th of our visual field, but the part that is most cellular dense and most interesting to the brain, depending on how you look at it. So how do we measure eye tracking data? So there's a lot of ways in which, as you all know, being data people, you get data, there's a lot of things you can do with it. And so eye trackers, they basically, by taking in all of this data, they sample the one that we have, it samples the eye about 30 times a second, so it's a lot of data. We run a lot of people on our studies, so we have a lot of data. And so we look at data both at the individual level. You saw that in the video that Andy showed of the eye tracking overlay. That's an individual. But then we look at data in aggregate because that's usually what can tell us the most about what's happening. The most common visualization you see, if anyone never does an eye tracking study or I help them do it, I always say you have to have a compulsory heat map. It's kind of required if you ever do an eye tracking study. And so this is what it looks like. So it's a very easy visualization to read. The areas that get the most visual attention are the hottest areas, the areas that are red. The areas with the least visual attention are cooler unto, that turns green, and then areas that are totally clear areas that you can expect, at least in aggregate, people didn't really look at. So this is a great visualization. It's super sexy. The thing that I don't like about it is it actually obscures the content underneath it. So as a person who likes good data visualization, that's something that kind of bugs me about it. So if you see a lot of our research, we use what is essentially the inverse of a heat map, which is called a gaze opacity map. So the way that this one works is it treats, imagine this particular dashboard is sitting behind a dirty window. And the more people look at particular areas, that part of the window is getting scrubbed clean. So you can actually see better the areas that people looked at. The other thing to kind of note is that I'm being careful about my words around visual attention. So I'm talking about visual attention, not cognitive attention. So just kind of remember that. And Andy will get into that a bit more about how much you can really push what it means to have visual attention on something. So nevertheless, this is a gaze opacity map. You're going to see this a lot in the results that we have. Another type of metric that we can get from eye tracking is, and these are the descriptive statistics. They're really good for helping us understand differences between two similar designs. So time to first fixation is one of the metrics that we derive from the data. So if you can imagine, if I want to know how long it took for someone to look at that human body form that's in that viz, I can actually tell the eye tracker, tell me how long it took, on average, for people to go look at that. So that gives us a measure of a type of kind of visual interest, right? How long did it take for someone to look? So you have how long did it take, but then you also can answer the question around, okay, once they got there, how long did they stay and look at it? And so that's the second descriptive statistic that we'll talk about in the second study that we did. So if you want to see, okay, how long did someone, when they went to the map, how long did they dwell on that? It will actually look across the whole viewing period and add it all up and say, okay, the map was looked at an average of 2.4 seconds. And just so that you guys all know how to read an eye tracker as it's doing this, if you see that dot get really, really big, that's a fixation getting really, really long. Okay, so the size of that dot is indicative of the size of the fixation. Okay, so with all of this then, we did a study. So please note, that says study number 1. For those of you who have seen that we have published some data about the research that we've done, study number 1 was that, but that also suggests we have study number 2 that we're going to talk about. This is data that we haven't published on the Tableau blog, so you guys get to see a sneak peek of that as well, which will be good. So, as a psychologist, as a cognitive psychologist, I had a bunch of hypotheses about what people were going to look at when they looked at dashboards. And the very first thing that came to mind for me was motion, anything that moves. Our brains are so good at detecting motion. We're built for it. It's how we basically have evolved to interact with the world. And just to give you a sense of this and how good we are at it, I'm going to play this video for you. And the question is, can you see the little bear? Did everyone see the bear? Yeah. quite amazing that we can see that bear, to be honest, because it is so far in the peripheral vision. We have all this light reflection and that kind of stuff, but it just goes to show how good our brains are at detecting motion and detecting things around us. But as you can imagine, often you don't have motion on dashboards, which is, and the reason why I bring that up is it brings me to my first hypothesis. If the first hypothesis I had was anything that's a jaggedy line, which we have a lot of because we often have bar charts or line graphs and visualizations, I thought something that would act as a visual, that was a visual line, would basically be perceived by the eye as being motion-like, right? Because it's cutting through space, it's creating this area that's like a cliff, etc. We've been really good in evolution to make sure that we're good at detecting these contours so we don't fall off stuff, etc. So I figured, okay, these types of things people are going to look at. They're going to involuntarily look at areas of dashboards like that. The next one that seemed pretty self-evident to me was anything that was human-like, a human face, a human body, something animal-like. The reason behind that one is what evolutionary psychologists call the 3 Fs, fight, flight, and fornication. So, you know, without our abilities to detect these things, none of us would be in this room. So I figured, okay, like people are really gonna pay a lot of attention to these humans. The other thing that I thought people would look at are call-outs. So we tend to see these a lot in dashboards where someone will put a red dot next to something, put an asterisk, etc. Again, the reason for that is less about the information that's being conveyed, but more about that area creates a high contrast visual moment, and that oftentimes our brains just can't help but look at it. So you see a lot of my hypotheses had to do with kind of what involuntary eye movements are going to occur when people are looking at dashboards, and then how does that affect the overall viewing of a dashboard, and does this help us with any sort of dashboard design? And then finally, I expected things like icons to get attention, and this is just from having done a lot of eye tracking studies in my lifetime. I tended to see any sort of like icons would get attention. I thought if there was like a Twitter icon or Facebook, people would look at it, that kind of stuff. So I had all these hypotheses, and then finally, given my conversation with Andy, I was wondering about the F pattern as well. So would people produce an F pattern when looking at dashboards? And partially being fun to disagree with Andy, and partially just being me, I thought we probably wouldn't see F patterns like you do in the studies that Nielsen did on Google. And so Andy and I were ready to see who was right.
I couldn't be wrong, surely.
Never. Andy's never wrong. How could that happen? So the results. Turns out I was both right and wrong with my hypotheses. As a researcher, that is very satisfying to have results where you're both right and wrong, so that was a great study for me. But the question of the day was Andy wrong? So I'm curious in the room how many people think Andy was wrong about the F pattern? Andy.
I think they're on my side.
I know. Huh, well.
Thank you. Sorry?
So
that's my co-author of my book,
exactly.
Heckling me in my own session.
Jerry.
Thank you, Steve.
He'll pay you later.
Yeah.
So I don't know about you guys, but I've never seen an F that looks like this. So it actually kind of looks like a spider, Andy.
Yes. Mm-hmm. It does. It's not an F.
Yeah, not an F. Okay, so the F pattern was not a universal finding that we had, okay? But when you think about an F pattern, it's actually important to deconstruct what the essence of an F pattern is to really try to understand how it may play out in dashboards. So if you look at this particular dashboard, you actually see an F pattern being constructed over time. So this is it's an animated heat map. So you see how people are looking at the dashboard, about 100 people. And what you're seeing is high visual concentration on the upper left-hand side, and then waning concentration to the right, okay? Which, again, you could interpret as an F pattern, right? So a lot on the left, and then distributed to the right. And then more on the top than on the bottom, okay? Now that phenomenon is something that we did see, and we saw on a number of our dashboards. So these are gaze opacity maps for 4 other of the dashboards that we studied, and it was pretty consistent. around that the top tended to get attention, it waned toward the bottom. There were some things that affected that, but nevertheless, the trend was generally the same across that. So top to bottom, left to right, we did see that. But this Financial Times one did not. It's the one that looks like a spider. So the thing that's important about this is that if you look at the dashboard, there is no content in the upper left-hand corner. There's actually very little content at all on the top. And so if you think our brains are smart enough to not go looking at information that's not there, right? So this F pattern that we think about, it's not habitual. It's not something that we can't not do, right? We will do it if there is stuff in that area. We will do that if there's stuff that is visually compelling in that area. But if not, our brains abandon the pattern and do something different. And so for this particular one then, what our brains did in aggregate is that the form of that dashboard, which was triangular in nature, our brains conformed to that form. And so that brought us to one of our first conclusions from the study that we ran last year at TC16, which was that form was a part of function. A lot of times what we saw with how these eye movements played out, they conformed to the physical form of the dashboard. So it's something then for us to think about. When you think about the dashboards that you make, all dashboards have a physical form. They may be triangular like this one. They may be columnar. They may be row-based, etc. All of them have a form. And that is something that you are implicitly communicating to your audience about where information is, and their eyes will to some degree conform to that form. And so again, it's just something to think about. The next thing that we saw, and this was one of the things that we were right about, was that the humans like humans, right? People were drawn to faces. We had a number and human-like figures. We had a number of dashboards that had human faces. We had this one with human figures on it, and people's eyes really went to that and spent a lot of time there. Not surprising given the 3 Fs. And then the other part of it, though, are the things that I was wrong about. So these jaggedy lines that I was so convinced our brains would interpret as motion and spend a lot of time looking at really did not get much visual attention at all. And so, at least compared to other things that were on the screen, and not really, they didn't trump other phenomenon that we witnessed inside the data. So things like a jagged line, things like an icon, or some sort of like clip art, that kind of stuff, they just didn't really get the attention that we expected. And so for that, then it was like, okay, well, we're not really seeing this as being something that's really drawing the eye, at least when it's competing with these other elements that are on the screen. And then, but one thing that I didn't predict, and frankly, I feel kind of dumb for not predicting when I started the research, is the importance of big numbers, or we like to call it the big-ass numbers of dashboards, the neon signs of dashboards. They were really kind of the stars of the show when we looked at all of our data. They got a tremendous amount of visual attention, and frankly, it's totally obvious and should not be surprising. When someone's looking at a dashboard, they're looking for information. And we're information-seeking animals. We're trying to derive information quickly. And a big-ass number is telling you that something's important, and our eyes are going to go and look at it. And so for that, then, we saw very consistently a lot of visual attention on these big numbers. And so that was, again, like, should have not been surprising, but was, because I didn't think about it. But it was really cool. And so that, we'll talk about more about that in a bit. The thing, though, that was interesting is we did have one dashboard that had big numbers on it, but didn't get a lot of visual attention on those big numbers. And so when you look at this particular dashboard, it's got some things on it that are actually pretty visually compelling. You have a human body, you have a map, but you also have numbers. And you can see there, it got a little bit of attention, but it wasn't the kind of attention we saw for some of the other dashboards. And so we were asking ourselves, like, what's going on here, right? Like, is it because they're in the middle of the dashboard? Does this have to do with their position on the page? Is it because they just can't compete with these other things that are pulling the human eye's attention away from it? Maybe they're just not big enough. Like, they're the big-ass dashboard, the big-ass numbers for that dashboard, but maybe not generally a big-ass number. We just didn't know, right? So there was some questions that were kind of left after we did this exploratory research. And so before we go on, I'm going to hand it back over to Andy. We're going to talk a bit about just what we learned with these studies. So take it away.
Thank you, Amy.
You're welcome.
So that was the end of study 1. Humans like humans, big numbers matter, form is part of function. Now, that was study 1. This was foundational stuff. If you wanted to critique this research, then you know what? There are problems with this research, but being good researchers in an industrial research team at Tableau, we did another study because that's what researchers do. They get data to back up things they might criticize. If anybody knows what I'm talking about, that's fine, but I won't go any further. But we did another study to combat things that you could criticize, or things that to challenge these questions. So we asked Jock, our VP of Research, can we have some more money to take an experiment to London? And we did. Jock said yes. Take a research so we went to the Gartner BI Summit in London in February to do a study 2 to challenge some of our observations and find out more information, which is what a researcher would do. But what did we focus on? Humans like humans, big numbers matter, form is part of function. What did we focus on, Amy? I think this is where you come back in.
Yeah, unless we want to see what other people think we should have focused on.
What do you think we should have focused on? Which bit would have been most compelling to ask for the second time? Any ideas? Location versus content? Yeah.
Okay. Location of
Study
what?
5.
Okay.
All right. Hey, you're like a plant.
I don't know.
Color contrast?
Okay.
Excellent.
We heard something else? Oh, the density of information on the dashboard? Yep.
One more?
It's a good one.
Interactive features?
Yep.
Yeah. I'll bring that up in the limitations.
Yeah.
White space? Yeah, that's a good one.
Yep.
Who said that? Top of
That's a
the
good
class.
one.
Excellent. Right.
So many good questions.
Yeah. And yes, so that's what, so Amy's going to tell you what we studied about
Yes.
next. All right, you've had your
So
water.
we decided to stick with the big ass numbers.
Yeah.
So study number 2. So we knew they got a lot of visual attention. We had some things that were indicating that there was some phenomenon with them. We wanted to kind of deconstruct it a little bit further. So with that then, we were like, okay, position. Can we mess around with these dashboards and mess around with these eye movements and learn something about how humans detect the information on the dashboards? So the first thing we did is we said, okay, what if we move, all things being equal now with these dashboards? We didn't change anything else about them. We didn't change really anything else about the study protocol. We just moved the big ass numbers from the top to the bottom. Okay, so that was one condition that we had. The next one we did was we moved from the left to the right. Okay, so this is kind of looking at the F pattern, our propensity to start. And a lot of the F pattern, the theory, the cognitive theory behind that is because we read left to right. It's habitual in our brains to do so. So okay, maybe the big ass numbers have to be on the left, and maybe they won't really work that well on the right. Let's see. So we're like, okay, just keep them on top and put them on the right. The next one was what if we changed the contrast? So someone mentioned color and contrast. So this particular dashboard, that 16 got so much attention. It was just super, super, super hot. So we're like, okay, what if we dial it down? What if we make it the same color as the other ones? So we're not going to change anything else about it, but let's just calm everything down over there and just see if everyone looks at it just as much. So contrast was the next one. And then we wanted to see, can we get people to look at those big numbers in the middle of that dashboard if we just up the font size? So is there a threshold to make something go from a big number to a big ass number, basically? So we wanted to figure out the medium font to large font, all things being equal, can we get people to look at it? So just as a reminder, this is where these descriptive statistics are really helpful for these A/B kind of tests, right? We want to see, all right, time to first fixation. How long does it take for somebody to look at something? These statistics are super helpful because I can tell you, okay, when I moved the number from the left to the right, it changed how quickly someone looked at something. Or if we moved them from the top or the bottom, it changed how long they looked at something. So this is just kind of a reminder of these things for you guys because we're going to talk about what that looks like. So again, there's the time to first fixation and then the fixation duration. So here's what we found. The one on the back is from the first study we did at TC16. And I meant to ask earlier, is anyone in the room, were you a part of that study last year in Austin? Does anyone remember getting sat down? Oh, awesome, in front of the eye tracker.
Thank you.
Thank you. That was great. Yeah, we ran about 100 and some people, both in Austin and then at Gartner. So on the top kind of backside, that's the TC study. And then if you see here at the Gartner, there was actually a lot of loss, right, of visual attention on the bottom. So when we moved those numbers to the bottom, the visual attention just kind of stayed on top. It went to the bar charts and stuff in those contrast areas instead of going to the bottom. And really, you can see it most in the descriptive statistics. So time to first fixation, it took about 2 seconds for people to fixate on those numbers along the top for the first study. But for the second study, where they were on the bottom, it took about 6 seconds on average for the eyes to get to that, which is quite a bit of time in comparison. So there was a real degradation of attention. Fixation duration was also pretty dramatic, where people spent just more time looking at numbers along the top, and then for the people who finally did get to looking at the numbers along the bottom, they just didn't spend as much time as all, so less than half the amount of time was spent looking at it. So left or right, so you can look here and see, at least in the gaze opacity map, that there was really not a lot of difference on the left or on the right. Seemed to be pretty much the same in terms of the amount of visual attention that those numbers got. And the numbers pretty much play out. It took people a little longer to get to the right-hand side. And that probably has to do with just our habitual, there was stuff to look at on the left-hand side, so start on the left and move. But once people got there and got to those numbers that were on the right-hand side, they stayed there essentially the exact same amount of time. Right, so for that then, you kind of have some creative license, which is good. And then for this one, the 16, the red one that got all that attention, as much as we tried, we couldn't get people to stop looking at it. So, so we got a lot of visual attention, and I mean, it was just, they were essentially equal. So the contrast did not seem to matter that much there. It really was probably a factor of it position being at the top, it being on the left, it being a big number, all those things. The red really wasn't that important, at least for the viewing period. And again, the fixation duration was also just, they were essentially the same. And so then the font. So we wanted to see, could we get people to look at it if we made it a big ass number? And turns out, yeah, we were able to get people to look at it. So this was also a pretty big difference. Time to first fixation. So it took people, if people were faster to get to the large font. So you see that there, where they were about a second faster to locate it. So we don't really know what was happening there. Like, were we intercepting the eye movements that were going to the human body or going to the map? But we also got longer fixations, so people spent more time there as well, which a lot of this has to do with probably, like, once you get a number to hit the threshold of big ass, then, then people realize that it's information that's meaningful and useful, and they spend time looking at it to make sense out of it. And so in terms of then just generally the stuff that we found in this study that actually matters or doesn't matter, is top or bottom seems to really matter. It seems to matter if the stuff that, if you really care about it, then, for people who are initially looking at a dashboard, stuff on top is really going to probably get the attention. Medium and large fonts matter as well. Left or right doesn't matter that much. And the high or low contrast doesn't matter as long as you're conforming to some of these other things that we found. Which we like this type of, these types of rules. They're starting to build these type of heuristics because it does give a lot of creative license while also giving some guardrails. And so, but I wanted, Andy's better at the designer stuff, so he's going to talk to you guys about more what you can do with this data. Back over to you.
Thank you, Amy.
You're welcome.
So before we start the summary of the recommendations, let's talk about the limitations. As you can see in study one, there are things that I'm sure in the room you were thinking, well, is that all of that right or wrong? And there are limitations to what eye tracking can do, and there were limitations in study one. The first thing, eye tracking tells the researcher where people are looking. It not tells them whether they're thinking about blue dots or thinking about hamburgers. It just tells them where they're looking. So it's not about understanding. We can infer stuff, but we can't know exactly what they're seeing. Secondly, in the first study, and in fact study 2, but something we're changing, is that the task was slightly artificial. We were saying to somebody, here's a dashboard you've never seen, look at it for 10 seconds. That's not a realistic study task generally, is it? We know the dashboards intimately once we've seen them a bunch of times. We know where to get the information we know where to get the information we need. However, we had to start somewhere, and so we started there. And then from there, we've tried to start addressing those limitations, and I think this week's study is particularly addressing that. Right. However, there is also one situation where you go, hi, Andy. This is the PA to your CEO, Adam. He wants a dashboard about your blog hits and blog visits tomorrow for a board meeting. You need to get it to him 20 minutes before the meeting. Thanks, bye. June. Right, we get that kind of task. Sometimes executives need a dashboard that is new and fresh, and they're not going to be able to look at it for some time. So, yeah, we know 10 seconds to an unfamiliar dashboard has its flaws, but there's elements where that's a real task. And there are other limitations. We don't have time to go through those here. But we have taken those limitations, and in the subsequent studies, we've made data-driven decisions. We've got data to back up some of the things we found in study 1 and then have tested in subsequent studies. And to summarize, we've got these 3 recommendations. First of all, think about form first. Yeah, I was wrong. The F pattern, you don't need to do the F pattern. It's still a good discipline, but it's not necessarily the only way to build a dashboard. Think about form first. Secondly, don't be repetitive. Now, this is an awesome chart. This chart actually shows speaker ratings from the conference a couple of years ago. And the blue dot represents one individual speaker across 4 different measures compared to all the other speakers. This is a great chart. It's repetitive because you might want to know all 4 of those measures. But what we have seen is that people's attention wanes. So if you need them, the stuff you have in the left-hand side will garner the most attention. So think about that as you're laying out stuff and whether you need that repetition or you can address that in a different way. And finally, it is the big-ass numbers. I've been doing data visualization for 10 years, and I'm standing on stage saying, don't do a chart, do a number. Right? Now, these numbers have context. The number is that each number is tied with a word, right? So the green in the middle is $3.4 million of potential billing that was not made in this company, in this consultancy for a given month, right? That's a headline. That tells the person the single KPI they need to know. First thing, the red dot next to it tells them they need to take action because something went wrong. And then from there, they can flow down and get the context of that number from the rest of the dashboard. So as we went through the process of writing the book with Steve and Jeff, we didn't really expect to write a book and then come out with this conclusion that bands are awesome. But our research is backing up that this is a good way of drawing attention to the single or 1 or 2 figures you need people to know before they get the rest of the data out of the dashboards. So they are our recommendations. Think about form first, avoid repetition, and use bounce. Our study is going to be ongoing, so we're going to back up these assumptions and keep on going. So with that, I'm going to say thank you. We're going to take questions, but what I think we'll do is if you want to go, we'll let you go. But if you want to stick around and do questions, then that's awesome. So with that, first of all, thank you very much for your time, and we hope you found that useful. Thank you. All right. Hi. Yeah, so that question was about dashboard clutter. Have we done any research about if you reduce clutter, does information get retained or not? No. Right? We haven't done that research yet. That's a really good question, and with time, we can address that. I mean, I think one of the interesting things you'll have seen, we're saying big numbers or contrast or things. There are lots of other things going on in the dashboards we've used, which might be influencing the results. We acknowledge that. So that, yeah, we haven't addressed that yet. Any?
Yeah, I mean, it is right now, we really don't, we're the first, as far as we know, to really start to ask these questions specifically around dashboards and how the information on dashboards, everything from the layout to the information to this design, affect people's ability to use them and answer questions. And so for us then, it's just, we're going to slowly build on our knowledge about how this stuff works and try to share to other teams and other researchers so that they can go and take the research wherever they want to go as well. We've talked to students who want to take our research and take it in different directions, et cetera. So I think there's a ton of opportunity. The questions that you all have in your mind about what if, they are all totally valid. And it's just a matter of just going and doing the research to start to answer the questions.
Good question. All right, I'll take the question over there and then come over here for these two, then take yours. All right, that one.
Yeah, so
sorry, there's a microphone on its way.
Oh, good.
Yeah, I'm just curious, what was, how much variability was there between individuals? Was there a high standard deviation in your descriptive statistics?
It's a good question.
Or was it tight?
Yeah, the variability varied. And I don't have it in here, so, but I can talk to you about it later. I can pull it up for you. For some of them, there was really high variability. And that was usually when, so take for instance, I believe for the one where the numbers were smaller, there was actually quite a bit of variability. So some people did look at them and some people didn't. But once we got the numbers bigger, then the variability shrunk. So there was a good amount of variability for some of those conditions. I just didn't put it in here.
Cool. All right, there was a question. Yeah. There were two questions here.
Thanks. I was just wondering, did you check how, when you increase the font size on the dashboard with a human figure, if it altered also the sequence of what was next? Because something that happened to me as I looked at the big numbers is that immediately I drove into another chart that I didn't notice before. So that also would be interesting to know how you can control the navigation of the
Yeah, I didn't look at them systemically. I didn't do any of the time to first fixation on the other areas. I just did an eyeball on the actual gaze opacity maps, and I still saw, okay, there's a lot of attention on the human figure, on the bars, et cetera. But it's a good point. It probably did kind of fundamentally change that sequence, but I don't know to what degree. And those sequences, that data gets pretty crazy when you have about 100 people, in it. It's not as reliable to get a good trend outside of just looking at the flat data in aggregate, But it is a good question. It probably did light up other areas.
I mean, this is the amazing thing. These questions, they're just in our heads.
So
it's
cool.
like, great question. Right, okay, we'll take that question and this one over here, and then we'll wrap it up.
I'm wondering, with dashboard titles and corporate banners occupying prime real estate in the top left, typically, are we looking at something where we might be heading in a direction where we put dashboard titles aren't going to be right in that prime real estate? Has that been considered at all?
Yeah, I don't. So we probably have enough data to look at the titles across the board. I didn't go very deep on the titles with the studies that we have run. Often they didn't get a lot of attention, but here's the problem. So this is actually methodologically a problem. The titles may have gotten read, and the eye tracker may not detect it because our reading behavior actually isn't in our full field vision. So someone can be looking at the big number and reading the title in their peripheral vision. So it's difficult to make any conclusions about, even if there's no attention on those titles, if people actually retained that information. So these are things that like, that's a totally, and I think it's a really important kind of study, line of study around what information is retained about the dashboard that is independent of what the eye tracker is saying, receive the visual attention. And I think titles would be the first place we'd start with that.
Awesome, great. Okay, last question.
Sure. For the contrast test you did, did you control for color blindness on that one?
No, we didn't. Good question. Yeah, we
just
didn't.
noticed it was red-green, so I was like, maybe they just thought it was the same.
Yeah, the number is high. Like, this is where, I mean, it's kind of lame to pull this, but my N was really high. I had, over 100 participants. That type of variability probably got washed out. But it is, it probably, if there were people that were colorblind in that would have affected the overall results. Yeah.
Awesome, great question. Yeah, always consider colorblind people in your design. Right, well with that, first I'd just like to say great thank you to Amy. I'm in marketing. It's been a great privilege to be able to work with her as she leads this research from the research team. She's an awesome person to work with, and I've learned a great deal, so thank you, Amy.
I've learned too, Andy, thank you.
Then to all of you, please fill out the session survey. Amy and I will be here to answer more questions.
Go do the study.
Go do the study.
In the Data Village.
Yeah.
It's super fun. You can sign up. Just go to the registration desk. It takes 10 minutes. And you do the study, and then afterwards we'll tell you what we're studying. We can't tell you beforehand because it'll mess with the results.
Ooh. Yeah, awesome. Otherwise, thank you very much. Have a wonderful conference.
Thank you so much.
Bye.